Hello, I'm Sam Farmer. I'm the NFL writer for the Los Angeles Times. The events of recent weeks have dominated the news, but they're not new. They've only shined a spotlight on inequities and racial disparities that have existed for generations. People are frustrated, they're angry, they're scared, and they're motivated. I wanted to assemble a panel of influential and informed NFL voices to sort of start a conversation, to listen a little bit. Let me introduce who's on right now. We've got Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy, Robert Woods, receiver for the LA Rams, and my Los Angeles Times colleague, LZ Granderson. But I'll start with you, Tony. What do you hope people are hearing now that they may not have heard for years? What about the events of recent weeks have sort of crystallized the conversation?
Well, I think what happened, people saw visually what they had been hearing about for a number of years. And when you hear it, then your question becomes, did that really happen? Are there other things to take into consideration? Maybe it's not exactly the way I heard, but seeing it visually has been so much different. And it's just, I think this could be what actually ends up moving the needle. And we have heard it for a while. I remember on Football Night in America 4 years ago almost, we did a story on Kenny Stills and Michael Thomas and their kneeling for the national anthem with the Miami Dolphins. And it was really in response to an incident that happened in Minneapolis, Philando Castile. And Kenny had some ties up there, and he said, I want to make a difference in what's going on in Miami. And we want to bring this to light. And we did a story, and it was a great piece. But people at that time didn't want to hear about it. They got so caught up in, is the kneeling patriotic or unpatriotic? They didn't hear the message of these guys. And that's what we wanted to do, show what Kenny and Michael were doing and the things that they had done to bridge the community and the police department. And it was fantastic. But I think now we're being forced to revisit that, and we're hearing these voices of these young men and young women who are saying, I want to speak up for people who don't necessarily have a voice.
It's almost like you couldn't turn a blind eye to it. You know, it was everywhere. It was all over the news, all over social media. No sports going on, no concerts or activities. So this was all that we were seeing was just information on injustice, police brutality, on what was actually going on. And I think you have people who, had time, were able to go out and protest, not being able to work and being able to actually stand for the cause and for the reason. And seeing it, I think it's just, the kneeling, 4 years ago brought alertness, brought awareness to what was going on. But I think now everyone is aware of the situation that's going on, and you see people are pushing for change, and some changes actually starting to get moving and happening.
LZ, how does this transform from a moment to a movement?
Obviously, I know, Coach Dungy's sense of spirituality. I'm not familiar with Robert's, but I know my own. And I can't help but look at this and just think the Lord works in mysterious ways. The country and the globe essentially shut down because we needed to prepare ourselves to deal with a virus that was going to quite possibly threaten society. And we thought the virus was coronavirus, but it's actually racism. Racism was actually the virus that has been killing us much longer than coronavirus. And we've been hesitant to address it head on in very substantial ways. We've seen throughout society, especially here in the United States, we've seen progression and regression. Fortunately for us, the progression has always exceeded the regression, but it's always been that yin and yang, that pulling effect. And so you're asking about what do we do to keep this thing going? I would argue that it's always been going. The question is, will the participants who have joined in this go round stick with the plan? African Americans, Blacks, Native Americans, Japanese Americans, Latinos, we've never not been engaged in this fight. We've had to. The question is, how do we keep the white Americans who may have thought it wasn't as serious or who may not felt that it was their fight to stick with the fight? And I think that is how you keep this element of the momentum going, by having white athletes, white owners, white executive, white CEOs realize this isn't something that you write a check for and then move on. This is something you need to roll your sleeves up in and stay in this fight the way that some white people have, and certainly minorities have been forced to deal with.
And Sam, I would just jump on that. I totally agree with these two guys. It's almost been a perfect storm, and I do believe God orchestrated it. As you said, we have had video of incidents like this in the past, but life was going on. Everybody would see it and say, oh man, that's a shame, what a shame, and then go back to work, go back to what they were doing. But for a month now, we haven't been able to do that. We have been arrested, so to speak. And I do think the Lord orchestrated it. And now, what is that going to do to change hearts? Because that's where this is going to come from. It's going to be people who see this, who think about it, who react and say, you know what, we do have to do something, and it's got to be a heart change.
I always go back to when Kaepernick was kneeling, and you see these guys lose their jobs, lose some marketing, Brandon Marshall losing some marketing deals. 4 years ago, you see the fight and you're like, man, I kind of need this job because I'm able to, get some funds and be able to give it back. But I think now you see it as it's almost, I look at it as like a sacrifice. They almost sacrifice now for athletes to where it's like, let's all take a stand. You see a lot more players saying they'll kneel, actors, making videos for Hollywood. So it's definitely growing, but I think just everyone's kind of on board. You have your coaches on board, your owners on board, and really just checking themselves. You think it doesn't involve you, but it really involves every single person.
We always go back to that image in 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. We know the brothers with the fists in the hair, with the leather-clad fists. We know all about John Carlos. We know about Tommy Smith. But it's important that we talk about Peter Norman, too, the white guy who was there. He also sided with those two brothers. He also went back home to Australia and had a very difficult time being reassimilated into society. He was ostracized. In fact, he's the one that actually ended up dying first, out of everyone, because of the alcoholism and trying to deal with what it meant for him to stand on the side of justice. The one thing that I've been trying to, drive home is that the impetus isn't on Black people or Black athletes to end white racism. The impetus is on people like Peter Norman. Where are the Peter Normans who are willing to stand with their brothers and sisters in this and stick with it no matter what the cost may be? That's an important element to all of this. Whether or not, the imagery of seeing white people marching resonates with people or not, the reality is that, as far as I'm concerned, it lets me know that you know exactly what we're fighting for, what this is about, and that this isn't something in which you're helping other people. This is something that's helping you too. That you're part of this. Because what did Dr. King say? We came on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Well, that's what this is.
How can the NFL be an effective agent of change here?
When 3 or 4 years ago, when all the flag protests started, what would I do if I was a coach? If I was still in the NFL, how would I handle it? And I said at that time, if I were Roger Goodell or if I were coaching, I would bring my guys in and say, hey, what is your issue? What are you concerned about? What do you want to voice? And let's figure out a way to give you that voice. I would have taken part of my press conferences on Monday and said, hey, I'm going to turn this over to my players. They have some concerns. I want to give them a voice and let them be heard. I think that's what we have to do, is come together and discuss it. If I were the president of the United States, I would not just shut everything down. I would say, you know what, we've got some young, intelligent, impressive men of influence, and they feel like something's wrong. I need to invite them, listen to them, see what's on their mind, see what solutions they have, and see if we can, come together on this. And I think that's what the NFL should do. That's what our governmental leadership should do.
All-pro cornerback Richard Sherman has joined us from the 49ers. And I wanted to get your take on that, Richard, just sort of how does the NFL effectively work as an agent of change this time?
before in 2016, I think when Trump made his comments, Pete Carroll pretty much did what Coach Dungy said he would do. He stopped us. It was before we played Tennessee Titans. Stopped us, brought us all in a room, and this was late. I think we canceled meetings or something, and asked what do we want to do. Because there were a lot of group texts going on between various teams throughout the league. There was conversations going on between us and the Titans, like, are we going to do something united? and at the end of the day, it was tough to come to a conclusion because there were so many people in our league that agreed with us, that are part of the brotherhood, that are part of the locker room, but they were not willing to sacrifice their relationships with their families, which rightfully so, to take a stand with their teammates. There were conversations had behind closed doors where it was like, hey, I want to stand with you guys. I want to make the point. I want to protest. I want to do my part. But if I sit, if I kneel, if I do anything, then I won't be able to go home to my family because my family sees this a certain way. And it's hard for me to explain to them how to understand this. And so the stance that the league has taken, over the last few years, it's hard for them to come back and rebuke what they've already done. The damage is already done, so there's really nothing they can do. I think the players are doing everything in their power to use their platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's press conferences, whether it's using their own money, their foundations to reach out and do the actual work, whether it's the Players Coalition and people like Malcolm Jenkins or Anquan, going out there and trying to legally change things and change it in Congress and in law. But I think at the end of the day, the league is going to throw money at it. The league is, if they really cared, it'd be a different story. But they already showed that they didn't really care about the issue. So once they already made that stance, it's hard to come back off that. It's hard to come back and say, hey, we care now. Hey, Colin Kaepernick was right. It's hard for Goodell to say, hey, hire Colin Kaepernick, get him a job.
We talked a little bit earlier about the sort of exasperation people are feeling. This is a generational problem that's only now once again come to light because it was put to video, and I've listened to your comments about that helps people empathize and put their relatives in that position. But can you sort of express the anger, frustration, exasperation, and maybe motivation people feel right now?
Well, I think just about any Black person in America can express that. I'm sure Robert could. I'm sure Coach Dungy could. It's one of those things that you've dealt with your whole life, and it's always been swept under the rug of society. Like we learned different rules growing up. We learned how to deal with police, how to deal with authority figures, how to not look intimidating, how to not be the angry Black man, how to be calm, because those are things you need to be able to maneuver in this world as a Black man. That you may not, if I'm a white suburban kid, I don't have to learn how to deal with cops and say, hey, keep your hands on the steering wheel, no quick movements. Sometimes put your hands out the window to make sure that you're not threatening. If anybody, running up on you or anything, try to not seem confrontational. Your parents teach you those things. Even in college, you have people walking by you, grabbing their purse, because if they don't know who you are, if you're not wearing athletic gear, then you're just an intimidating Black man to them, angry Black man. And so I think in society, there have been these constraints and these stereotypes for so long that it's time to tear them down. But it's going to take more than just Black people. Black people have been upset because we've been persecuted. We've been harassed by the police your whole life. Every time you go out anywhere, you drive and the police pull behind you, it's bad. In LA, as soon as they pull behind you, I'm getting pulled over. My day is going to be ruined today. And so it's hard for me to ever fully explain that anger and that frustration. But I think people are trying to express it and finding different ways to express it, whether it's protesting, whether it's rioting, whether it's burning down buildings, et cetera. People, it's not to say it's the right way, but that's how people are expressing their anger because it hasn't changed. It's been cyclical, ever since the Rodney King beatings. LA went crazy and then it went away. It's kind of the same thing happening right now, but it's happening on a bigger scale.
I look at the situation what's happening right now in Oklahoma State and Coach Gundy, and there's an uprising, there's an awakening there. I think about what happened with Dabo Swinney and Clemson. There seems to be an awakening there. The question is, what are white university presidents, CEOs, team owners, what are they going to do to stay involved in this conversation? Because I don't foresee anytime soon the people of color who have been out in these streets, people of color who have been saying, this guy said the N-word, this guy is wearing this t-shirt that represents X, Y, and Z. I don't foresee that taking a back seat to anything, not anytime soon. However, I am curious as to whether or not these statements that are being released, whether you're talking about the Confederate flag, whether you're celebrating Juneteenth all of a sudden as if it's a brand new holiday, I don't know if any of those things are going to be around a year from now without white people and white people in the rooms where these decisions are happening being vigilant. So I guess the real question is whether or not white people who are in these positions, are they really serious about being anti-racist, or are they just trying to win the press conference, if you will, because right now racism is not in fashion.
I remember 1968. I'm a little older than some of these guys on the call.
You don't look it.
I'm right there with you, buddy.
I was 12 years old trying to process what was going on in the aftermath of Dr. King's killing. And my dad taking us and sitting us down and saying, here's what the world is like. And there are people who are going to dislike you for no reason, just because of what you look like. There are going to be people who think differently. But in this house, this is how we're going to treat people. We're going to treat people with the love of Christ. We're going to treat people with respect. Doesn't matter how they treat you. That's what we're going to do in our house. And to me, that's what's got to happen in this. Everybody around the country who sees this and who is upset, they've got to start at home and say, first of all, I may have to make a change in how I do things, but at least the people in my home and my sphere of influence, I'm going to make a difference. And then when I go to work or when I'm in my neighborhood, I'm going to have the boldness to make a difference. And that's how we've got to start. And it's got to be changing hearts one by one. That's the way it's going to be long lasting. Otherwise, as Richard said, all of us have said, it'll be cyclical. And we've seen it before. And when people go back to work after the pandemic, if there hasn't been those thoughts and discussions, it will go back to, oh, well, let's just hope nothing else happens in the near future so we can move on.
And I would just add, Sam, that there just needs to be real honesty and boldness, too, in these conversations that Coach Dungy is talking about. Stop talking about this issue like it's like aliens came down, implemented this system, draconian system that has oppressed one group of people. No, we did this to ourselves. And we need to confront that truth and stop looking for flowery language because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. Well, you know what? People are dying. So to hell with your feelings. This is why they're dying. Let's stop allowing certain flowery language around the Confederacy cover up the fact that we're concerned about losing revenue for a certain generation or a certain population of people. We know what the flag is. We know what the name of the Washington's football team really is. We know what these things are. Let's stop trying to be, I guess, respectful of people who may be harboring damaging ideology that's leading to deaths. We need to stop doing that and just be real with it.
One thing me and another teammate was talking about is how do you, there's some people who never have these interactions or never have encounters with white people or black people almost their whole life. They grow up not seeing a black person, not seeing a white person. It's like, how can we incorporate these teachings early on to where you may not have an encounter, but some experience, the history, you know about it. It's not just, just a blind eye. Not many people even know about Juneteenth, And I feel like that should be implemented in our history. You really think about why not,
Right. That's a great point. And we were talking about that too in one of our Zoom meetings. It's the history that they want to ignore. It's the history they want to glaze over. Like imagine in Nazi Germany, the Germans like just saying, hey, we don't want to talk about Hitler. We don't want to talk about Stalin. We don't want to talk about what happened in those evil times. We don't want to talk about the terrible things that went on. we just want to gloss over it. Like, hey, that was a bad time. That's kind of what America does with slavery, with the civil rights movement, with the Civil War. That's why things like the KKK can still exist and not be a terrorist group and not be frowned upon. That's why the Confederate flag can still be waved, even though they fought to make sure slavery stayed, to make sure Black people stayed enslaved. People, I think there's so many people that kind of subscribe to that ideology in power, in politics. And it's an old line of thinking, but it's deeply rooted in our system and in such a way that it's hard to get it out without getting those people out. And they're in such powerful roles. The system's designed for them to be successful, and the system's designed for them to stay and for their next generation to stay and the next generation to stay. And until we weed those people out, until we resod the grass, we dig those roots out of our government, out of our freaking society, we'll continue to have these problems. Because no matter how many suits they put on, even if they don't put a white hood on anymore, the way they think and the way they regard African Americans and people of color are beneath them. And so as long as we still have that line of thinking in our country, things won't change, especially if it comes from elected officials. And during Trump's time, you see it coming out more and more. People are becoming more and more bold. Even government officials, even elected officials are becoming more and more bold, and everybody's outraged. Like, oh my God, look how they're talking. That's how they've always thought. They just haven't been empowered and emboldened like they have right now. And I think we need to take these messages and take these people who are putting themselves out there and eliminate it.
I see a little bit of accountability coming up now, like people getting fired from some racist remarks, some things. I think the biggest thing is just like you said, how long is this accountability will last? Will it just fade away once work begins or the pandemic ends? But it's just all about accountability, being honest, holding the top people, CEOs, our owners accountable, not just now, during this what's going on.
What's the player's role in keeping this, not putting it on the players, but keeping this at the fore in terms of when people are watching the NFL? What do you anticipate this season?
Well, I anticipate players making a stand, whether it's taking a knee or whether it's using their press conferences. Players get press conferences every week. So I expect a lot more of them to convey these messages, to convey messages about police brutality, about equality, about the systematic racism that's going on, and to have statistics, because we have really intelligent and sharp players in our league who get the information and who will convey it, And I think that's the part where fans are going to have to kind of work with us a little bit, because it is kind of a release for them. Football is kind of a peace. Hey man, I just want to watch some football, forget about my life, and just cheer my favorite team on. There is some of that. You want to forget about politics. You want to forget about all the stuff you have going on. But right now you can't. Because to Woods' point, when you haven't seen a Black person your whole life, you don't interact with them on a daily basis, but your favorite player is a Black player. You know what I mean? Like there should be some kind of relationship, some empathy there, but there isn't. And I think us using that platform to make the point may turn some fans off, but it is what it is. I think guys are going to continue to have this fight and continue to fight the good fight.
I see a lot of players kneeling this season. I personally thought it was awareness, bringing awareness to police brutality. I personally like to see a lot of action take place, whether like with Richard Sherman say press conference, or even just being out in the community a lot more. Even the teams being more vocal in the community. I know the Rams, they want to double down with the Brotherhood Crusaders, with the Watts Rams, but like even just taking as players, doing it on your own, going out in the community and just impacting, whether it's having a voting party, having just a signing outside of a voting venue where people could come, just anything to bring voters out, bring change, donations, gifts, anything for the kids. I feel like schools, all these things that can impact. I think now is the biggest time to just take action and move forward. I think everyone's aware of what's going on.
I would really emphasize that to all you guys. I don't think it can be just the kneeling. Obviously, the feeling about that is much different now than it was 4 years ago. I think that'll be accepted more. But I really think it's what you said, Richard, taking advantage of those press conferences and getting your voices out there and saying, hey, this is what I see. This is what's going on in my community. This is what needs to happen as a solution. And then that young fan who maybe doesn't know you, but you're his favorite player, he says, man, Richard Sherman's concerned about this. Maybe I should be impacted by it. I think that's how you guys are going to make a huge difference, because you are going to have eyes on you this year, no question, and ears open to what you say.
And I would encourage you to call out our hypocrisy within the media as well. I know.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we can be, quite hypocritical ourselves. If JJ wanted to raise money, for instance, for hurricane relief, that's okay to use your platform and talk about that. But if you talk about, police brutality, all of a sudden now you're supposed to stick to sports. Joe Burrow talks about what happens in his community, and everybody starts pouring in money to try to help uplift his area, which is a great thing. But if a brother does the same thing about what's happening in his area, he's told to shut up and dribble. So it's okay to call us out too when we have blind spots, whether they're purposely done or not.
Richard had mentioned Colin Kaepernick, who is emblematic of this struggle, and wanted to ask any thoughts on his future in the league and what, if anything, that means.
I don't know. I think people make a big hubbub about he hasn't thrown a pass in, however many days, but, there's tons of backup quarterbacks in this league who haven't thrown a pass in a live game outside of the preseason in a really long time. And that point has been made by several outlets. So I don't think that'll matter. It's like riding a bike. He'll get out there, he'll get a feel, he'll maneuver, he'll play as he always played. But I don't think teams are willing to do it, as they haven't been. I think now it's more conversation about it. But if teams were willing to do it, they would have done it years ago. Teams were literally willing to put a worse player on the field at quarterback and lose games than to get this man a job. So if your franchise was thinking that way in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, et cetera, what changes now? Like, you're literally willing to, hey, we just throw a season away instead of signing this guy who could probably help us win. So I don't know if that's changed.
Well, I hate to disagree with you, Richard, but I think a lot of people in the league are not victims, but they respond to political correctness. And 3 years ago, it wasn't politically correct. Now maybe it is, or it's seen in a different light. So I hope he gets a job. And I think he might, because of the climate change.
Yeah, we're in an election year, and the president, when he first started tweeting, was freshly in office and had all the capital. Now, since then, he's been impeached. He's embattled. He's facing questions about how he handled this pandemic, and so he's not operating from the same place of strength. And perhaps some of the owners no longer feel as if they need to be afraid of what he can do with his Twitter account. I think that's also contributing to the change in climate.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot on this topic for some time to come. So thank you again.